This is September the 17th, 1981, Oklahoma City. This is Martha Blaine, and I am reviewing the events of yesterday when I went to Pawnee to talk to Nora Pratt about women's roles in the old Pawnee culture. The other side of this tape is her comments on certain topics that were raised. However, after the tape ran out, it was lunchtime, and a lot of things were said during lunch that are not on the tape, and which I have tried to remember to put on this side of the tape, which is tape side 2. Before I do that, though, I will describe Nora's home and something about the inhabitants or the people that live there at the present time. She lives on her father's allotment, which is, let's see, which direction from town is that? It's north of town. It's on the same road that Dolly Moore lived before her death and where her son Wilson Moore now lives. Nora lives out in the country, probably about 3-4 miles from town. The road to it is a gravel road. Her house was built about 1908, I think she says on the other side of the tape. It's an allotment house that was built for her father, and it's a rather small house. I don't know the total number of rooms. I think possibly it has 4 rooms. I was only in the living room and the kitchen. The living room is small. It's probably about 12 by 10 feet, and the kitchen is actually larger than the living room. Off of the kitchen, there is a small room that probably was a bedroom at one time, but is now a storeroom and is heaped high with various things, including a trunk that I noticed, and shelves with many different objects on them. There is probably off of the living room, I'm sure there's another bedroom. The door was shut. I couldn't see if it was a bedroom, but I presume it is. There's a small bed, a daybed-sized bed in the living room. There are, as far as I know, living in this house, 3 people, one of whom is Robert Tilden, who is Nora's only brother, and he ate lunch with us. Another inhabitant of the house, I think, or he may live somewhere else, is her son, Willard, who just, I don't think he is employed at the moment. He's a man probably in his 40s, maybe a little older than that. I couldn't tell, but I think he must be in his late 30s or 40s. She said he was interested in religion and being a preacher now. Israel remarked to me about, he asked me how I got to work at the Historical Society, and I told him how, and when he left the house, he said he was going to walk around a bit, and that he was interested in that kind of work. That's the kind of work he'd like to get into, he said. While we're talking about him, I might as well add that he told me that there were several old mud lodge foundations that he liked to dig around in, and they belonged to White Eagle, the White Eagle family, and they were in the woods somewhere on that allotment. It sounded like there were several in one group. Now, I've never heard Garland mention these, and so I think that this would be an interesting thing to pursue. I asked if I could go see them sometime, and they said yes. Nora also, in speaking about old sites, was talking about the old South Roundhouse, that she knew where the foundation for that was, and next time I go up there, that we might drive over there and look at it. Back to the description of the house. The house is what you would term filled or filled with things. It's cluttered. It's small, and there's none of the furniture is new. It's to look at it, you would say the people that lived in it were poor people from middle class standards. And Nora had a quilting frame up in the living room, which almost filled the living room. There's a TV, day bed, as I said, a few chairs, a locked china closet that's small with a padlock on it that seemed to have small items in it, some ceramics. I couldn't see that the objects were valuable. I think perhaps it's locked because of grandchildren. She has a small grandchild that stays with her, and perhaps it was intriguing for him to get into it, so they padlocked it so he couldn't. Didn't stare at it or look at it too closely, but I think that it was locked maybe for that reason or for another. I don't know. The kitchen has a large table in it. Looks like it's been recently repainted, and there's things stacked around. There was a box full of melons and squashes on the floor. There was a bucket in which the garbage was placed. There's a stove and refrigerator and cupboards, and there's a very old pie safe. Not a pie safe, but an old like a safe in the corner that seems to be an antique. Two windows in the kitchen. One looked out on a small little pasture yard area in which there were some horses, a black and white horse, and I saw a black and white dog run by at one point. There's been a garden over on the one side of the house. It's largely overgrown now. The yard was mowed. When I arrived there was a pickup truck and a brown car, probably 4 or 5 years old, that I've seen Nora and Andy drive. Andy works at the agency, so he was there for his lunch hour, and then he left and went off to work. Back to work. Robert Rice, the brother, sat on the front porch most of the time. He came in for lunch. Willard came in at lunchtime. Then he left after lunch. Nora was dressed in a house dress. She's always worn house dresses, cotton house dresses, or maybe in the winter polyester house dresses, but it's always, ever since I've known her, she's worn low-heeled shoes and cotton stockings, and rather long house dresses, not to the floor, but way below her knees for the most part. She usually wears earrings. She has her hair back. It's gray, and she's 73 now, and her hair is worn back in a bun. And she to me hasn't changed much facially over the years that I have known her. She's an outspoken person. She's a great kidder. She has a rather strong voice, as you can hear on the other side of the tape. And she teases a lot. And she, for example, when I was at the end of this tape on the other side, I got there right at noon, and Adam was eating, and I thought, well, I'll probably be invited to eat lunch, but no, she didn't do that. She said, what do you want to do? So I thought, well, maybe she wants me to interview her and leave. It's the first time. She's not just sure what I'm after, what I want, and so forth. But anyway, after we got through, I looked out, and Willard was eating sitting at the table, where Andy had sat. And Adam, excuse me. And I said, Nora, would you mind if I had a piece of bread? I said, I'm really hungry. She says, oh, sure, come out to the kitchen, let's eat. And she said she'd just forgotten all about it. She was quilting and so forth. And then when I was out there, she was very, very gracious and said, well, sit down right there. And she says, I didn't know whether you'd want to eat with me. And she said it very seriously. I thought, I kidded back, and because I knew that, yeah, I said, why not? I said, I'm hungry. And she says, oh, I'm just teasing, you know. I said, I came up here. I said something to the effect, well, I arrived just in time to eat, you know. I was, trying to keep the mood light there. But anyway, we had lunch, and and since I'm talking about it, I'll tell what we had. We had, she said, we'll just have a light lunch, and she brought some cheese and bologna out from the refrigerator, and she had on the stove, she had some meat cooking, so she put they were pork chops, real thick pork chops that had not been fried but had been cooked in some manner, so they were very soft and came right off the bone. And she put those in a tin, not tin, but enameled little enameled bowl, and set them down in front of me. And we had bread, and I think I had a plate. I began to eat my meat with my fingers, because at Indian doings, people do take the meat and eat it with their fingers. She said, you want any silverware? She didn't use the word silverware. If you want a knife or a fork or something, it's right there. They were stuck in a jar on the table. The paper towel roll was used for napkins, and there was a great big covered a banana cream pie type cake made by Rites something or other company, and she said she'd won that last night at Mamie Morgan's birthday party, and she'd won for being such a good hand game guesser. More about that later. Then then also on the table there was something else that looked like a dessert, like pieces of lemon cake or something covered. And there was some coffee in a modern coffee maker, the drip-through kind, electric, that sits on a little platform, like Mr. Coffee, but it wasn't that brand. She poured me some coffee, herself some coffee, and that was it. That was what we ate. Bread and cheese and bologna, and that meat was cold. The pork was cold. It was good. And the cake. It was fine. It was good enough lunch for me. Okay, that was lunch. Right, now, outside of the house, there's a small building across the driveway comes in and circles around a small group of trees, probably a diameter of about 30 or 40 feet circle. It's not a large circle. There's an old car sitting off, and noticed a toilet stool had been placed out in the yard under a tree, probably had been replaced. So there must be a bathroom in the house there. Also, there were various things stacked around the yard. It was a fairly neat yard, though. Then off to the northeast of the house, I'm going to have to get these directions right, but looking out the front door, you can see over about 400 or 500 yards. You can see the roundhouse, the Old North roundhouse that was built on this property by her father, Tilden, and she said that when it was built, that 4 men came out and helped dedicate it, and prayed and so forth and so on. It was built probably, she said, in the 20s. I believe this is on the other side of the tape. I think she talks about that on the other side of the tape, so I won't go into that here. Okay, I have a list here of subjects that seem to have been discussed or come up, and they are mostly we're trying to emphasize women's roles as a subject. So I have some things here that I've jotted down from the notes I made on the way home in the car with one hand on the wheel and one with a pencil in it. Um, I asked her what her mother did, if her mother had ever talked about what she did, because she was supposedly born in Nebraska. As a little girl, what did she do? And she said, oh, she was very vague about this. There's no real specific information as to techniques and things being done, but she said she'd help around the house, and she'd help cook and hand her mother things, and the women had to carry wood, and she said they had to go out and bring it back, and they had a strap which they put around them in some manner. She didn't describe how the strap was placed, but they carried heavy loads of wood and they stacked it on the inside of the mud lodge up there in Nebraska. They worked in the fields. I asked her about what age did she think the little girl would do this, and she wasn't sure about this at all. When she was old enough, big enough to do it, is what her response, I think, was to that. She really didn't have much to say about what women did up there in Nebraska. Maybe it's because she didn't have time to think about it, or the way I asked the question. Anyway, to talk more about what Nora does in this situation she lives in now. She, I've mentioned on the other side, she talked about, which I thought was significant, was the fact that women had friends in other tribes, and that's been discussed. She said one thing her mother did was that she assisted in births. That she didn't use her midwife, but she said she would go and she knew what to do, and people would call her mother to assist them. And she gave no specific techniques. I didn't ask her for any. She did say that women walked around a lot before the birth. They walked around almost to the last minute. They didn't lie down as much as white women do. And they would kneel sometimes. Garland had mentioned kneeling as a position, but she didn't say much about this, although she may know. She did say that she herself had just recently been involved in something like this. Her daughter Roberta, who's a nurse, called her and said that Belle, now I don't know who Belle is, was having long and difficult labor at the hospital, and she wanted her mother to come, so her mother said okay, she would. She went over and she kidded the girl. She said, why, how come it's taking you so long? She says, maybe the baby's got big feet and you can't get out. She just kind of laughed with her, made her laugh, and the girl was real glad to see her. And so then after a while, she said, I sat there and I prayed, and she said I put my hands on her stomach. She said the baby's head was way up high. She indicated right under the diaphragm. She said it hadn't turned yet, and she says I rubbed its little head, and she said I prayed about it. Prayed, and I rubbed the little body, and prayed some more, and then she says I stopped, and she said everything's going to be okay, and she she said she decided to leave, and oh no, pardon me, the girl after this went on, the girl said suddenly she had a feeling. She said the baby, she said, something's happening. And she called the nurse, and the nurse came in. She says, oh, he's turning. The baby is turning, and so we'll take you right to the delivery room. And Nora said she left. He says, well, it's going to be a boy, and she's going to be all right. And Roberta says, how do you know? She says, I know it's going to be a boy. And she said, sure enough, the baby was born. It was a boy. She knew. She didn't imply how she knew, but she just knew it was going to be a boy. So Nora is sort of involved in that sort of thing now as her mother was, but in a different way. Then an important thing, another thing that's happened in her family is that her daughter Roberta, that I've just mentioned, who was in the World War II, was an Army nurse, is now the drum keeper for the Veterans Association or group here, the Pawnee. And William, she said, William came once and he asked Roberta, he asked Adam, he asked them. Now, I'm not sure whether he asked Roberta directly or whether he asked her father if Roberta would be the drum keeper. I presume he asked, he came out to their house to talk about it anyway. And Adam said, well, he says, I have other sons here that have been, I have sons that have been in the Army. He said, but Nora implied that he indicated that they shouldn't do this, be the drum keeper. Well, he wanted Roberta to do it. He'd asked to come. William Morgan had asked Adam if Roberta would do it, or asked Roberta, and Roberta was there, and they discussed it. And I'm not just sure of this, but Roberta said she didn't want to do it. In fact, I think she refused, and they asked her again, and she said, well, this would be very unusual for a woman to do this. But she felt that she should do it, and her parents, I guess, agreed that she could do it, and so that she accepted it. And the point was made that this was very different, but that she was assuming a responsibility, and this was a good thing for a woman to do. And Roberta had said the tribe would talk about her, people would talk, and Daisy Ellis had talked about her and didn't think that she should do this. And her mother had said, well, just ignore the people will criticize you, but you go ahead and do it. So she is the drum keeper. Another thing that Nora is very good at, of course, she cooks or has cooked in the past for numerous tribal events. She's a good cook, and people ask her to supervise this operation many times. She's also a very good guesser at the hand game. And I asked her, I said, how do you do that, Nora? I said, you're so terribly good at it. She was telling me that Mamie Morgan's hand game birthday, which hand game was played apparently, in the big new roundhouse last night, or the night before last, that she had just mowed them down, just one right after the other, and she'd won 4 games. And she said, I said, well, she says, well, she said, I just know. She says, I just know where it is. I said, well, how can you do that? And she says, well, I watched their faces, and I watched the way they take the dice, and I just know. And she says, and then I said, well, is it that you've watched certain people play so long that you kind of know which hands they change to or don't change? She says, yeah. She says, some people will change hands every other time. So I think that is a large is an important part in the efficacy of some of these very good hand game finders or guessers, is that they have played with these people so long that they know the tendency of what they will do. Of course, I think that the person hiding also knows that this is a possibility and might try to switch his pattern. Anyway, she is a noted guesser, and she'd been awarded these cakes or pies that were on the table because she had been so good at this. She'd been given to them. Maud Chisholm had given them to her. Maud must have had something to do with supplying food for this birthday party. Another thing about the hand game, she said in the old times, the hand game, she said there wasn't all this exaggerated waving and putting the bean behind you or the button behind you. She said you just put it in your hand and you just changed it right there in front of you, and you didn't put it behind you. And she said it was a simpler arm movements in the old days. Nora seems to be quite proud of the fact that people call her from all over the United States just to talk to her. And she was saying that sometimes they call late at night, and sometimes they call from here and there, and just to talk to her. She also gets visitors from everywhere. Of course, she's been used frequently as an informant now, particularly by Douglas Parks, and we discussed him for quite a while. And people have come to find out information from her. And I think she's very proud of the fact that she's considered a knowledgeable person in the tribe. Speaking more about women's roles, we talked about polygyny, and she was talking about the fact that there were more than one wife early before the turn of the century, and that she cited the case of in case of death. I asked her what happens to the property of the husband, and she said she knew of one case in which there were 3 wives, and they simply divided the horses and the property between them without any going through any legal aspects of it through the courts or the agency. They just simply divided up the property of the husband between them. They had, I said, did they all live together? She said, no, they didn't at that time. They lived separately. So I don't know exactly when this was, after 1897, when they had to choose one wife, but these other wives may have lived in different places but still been wives. I'm not sure what happened in that instance. With divorce, the man would, she said the man, if they were living with the woman's parents, and they often did, this was an old pattern for the man to come and live with a wife, where the man would simply go back, would leave the household in the case of divorce in the old days. We talked about the roundhouse. Roundhouses came up frequently because there is a roundhouse on her property in which some of her children are living now. They're using it as a home because they couldn't find another place to live. It seems to have a tin roof. I'd like to look at it more closely and take pictures of it. She said we might go over there sometime. It's this house was built by her father, as I said, and was dedicated properly. The date she gives. She talked about at the table about a hand game that was held there with Ezra Fields named as a challengee by 7 old ladies who decided they were going to take on Ezra and beat him. And the old ladies, let's see, I have their names. I don't have all of their names down there, but let's see, who were they? One of them was Dolly Moore. One was Alice Morris. These are South bands. Those names are. So apparently the hand games at that point were being attended by both bands. Anyway, the old ladies were going to defeat Ezra, and he beat them all at one time. And they were, of course, a lot of kidding went on about that. She remembered that must have been an interesting game. This north roundhouse was moved twice. Once it was down near the lake, where the lake is now. The first one apparently was down there. Then it was moved up onto Mrs. Goodeagle's place. It was moved, apparently, taken apart and moved. And then this third one is the one on Nora's place, and it was built by her father. Goodeagle's place, she pointed out the kitchen window toward town. That allotment was where the second roundhouse had been. I suppose this is common knowledge, so I'm not relating anything that isn't fairly well known. Another something about mud lodges is that I mentioned white eagles, so that's something I've already mentioned, so I won't go into that. Okay. Let's talk about another type of ceremony. Not necessarily. She was talking about some of the differences now in ceremonies. This really came from the roundhouse discussion. She said in the old days when there was a death and they had the funeral feast, she said the family would simply gather up the belongings of the deceased and may put them into a big bundle, his clothes, mostly clothing and things like that, and they would bring them to the feast and they put them out in the center, and they'd sort of spread them out a bit, and the man who was in charge then would indicate who was supposed to come and get the different objects that were out there, whether they had free choice or whether he said take this or what. But she said it wasn't this kind of giveaway we have now where people buy blankets and shawls and distribute them to the tribe. She said it was a smaller, limited audience that she remembered, and there wasn't so much. There weren't so many people from so many places. It wasn't the fancy business it is now. And at feasts in the older times, she said people would all bring things. She said it wasn't catered in the way it is now, where she does the cooking and people don't bring anything, but they donate money ahead of time, or the family pays for it. She said it was always the primary responsibility of the man who was giving the ceremony or the feast to supply more meat and more bread than anybody else, but other people would bring things, and usually they were Indian dishes. She said there weren't any cakes and pies and salads. She said that just wasn't brought. And they would bring things in little kettles, covered kettles. And she said they often would walk all the way out, and speaking about this roundhouse on her property, they'd walk all the way out from town, she said, and they'd be carrying their food and would walk, and that's a long walk, but they would come out and attend the ceremony at the North Roundhouse and then walk back home again. Some of the food that she described at lunch was that she remembered 3 different kinds of corn they had when she was young. It was red, white, and blue. And then there was a speckled corn that died out that she hadn't seen for a long time. There were 4 different kinds of squashes she remembered. One was a large sort of orange bean. She said it was so pretty. She pointed to my coffee cup, which was yellow, bright yellow, and she said it was about that color, but she used the word orange. But it wasn't, either the bean was yellow or orange, but I'm not sure. And then there was a large speckled butter bean, she recalled, and some other food. They use corn in different ways. She said they used to, up in Nebraska, they'd make flour and water and she said baking powder, and they would clear a place in the coals and just lay the bread in that area in the fire and cook it just flat on the ground, apparently on the hearth. And she said it was good. And she talked about different ways to prepare corn, one of which I hadn't heard was to make some kind of a ball, whether it's this mush or ground or with flour or what. I didn't ask her, but it was made in balls and cooked. Talking about her days at Gravy, she helped a young man named Greer write a paper for class at Pawnee High School, and they were talking about the differences in India in school days, and she was saying the discipline was much stricter, and then she can remember they used to have to sometimes kneel in the hallways for 2 or 3 hours. That was one of their punishments, and they also got spanked. And she said in those days parents were much more disciplined with their children than they are now, and they behaved better, and they punished them. And she says it's very different now. They don't do that anymore. And she said that was part of the problem, was that the strong discipline had disappeared from the tribe. Talking about her family, she said her grandfather was called Crooked Finger by the Cheyennes, and he had a broken finger or something had happened. She wasn't sure, but when the Cheyennes visited, or when he visited them, that was the name that he gave me. We didn't go into that. I did mention that there's lots of stories about the Pawnee seizing of the Cheyenne medicine arrows, and She didn't blink an eye, but she supposedly thinks, Garland says she has one arrow from that bundle, and we'll get to that sometime. Okay. I see I have listed here that one of the old ladies was Leader. Her first name I have forgotten. She told me, but I've forgotten. One of the things that I told Nora when I got there, I took her a roast, a small roast, and had it in a bag and gave it to her. And she says, oh, you didn't need to do this. Why did you do this? And I said, because Garland told me this was what should be done. And she just sort of looked at me, and I also told her that Garland had said that some of these things about women's activities that he wasn't sure of, and that I should come and ask her someday, should ask her particularly because she knew. And this is true. He had said that Nora would be able to help if I needed to know information about some of these things, particularly birth and things like that. Though I actually, from what she may know these things, but she's not saying them. But Garland had knew a great deal about these things, and that information is on notes in the file on birth. But she knows me better and we talk more, I think perhaps we'll get into some of these things. Of course, from a large part of the interview, Adam was sitting in the kitchen, could hear, and her son came in and sat. So I told her after they had both left that there were some things I want to talk to her about, that the men were there and I didn't want to ask her, and she seemed to understand that. So there will be things to talk about that would be more proper that men are not present. At least from, I would think, maybe not. I mean, maybe it doesn't make any difference to her one way or the other. The tape now reads 42.5, and I will stop here. There's some tape left, but I may have to fill it up with information as I think of it that I didn't jot down in my notes to discuss.